The late 70s and the 80s were the golden age of video games. We burned through rolls of quarters with friends, crowding around glowing screens and losing track of time. If we ever got all that change back, there's a good chance it might have been enough for a brand new Cadillac. From Pac-Man, Tron, and Tempest to so many others, these were the games we grew up on. Today, we're remembering 20 games we just couldn't pull ourselves away from. When Pac-Man hit arcades in 1980, it wasn't just another game, it was a full-blown craze. We had the lunchboxes, the t-shirts, the stickers, even the Saturday morning cartoon, and that sound still echoes in our heads. We'd spend hours dodging ghosts and chasing that last blinking dot. Then came Ms. Pac-Man with her bow and new mazes, and the obsession started all over again. Let's be honest. Some of us liked her version even more. Asteroids didn't need fancy graphics, just glowing outlines, quick reflexes, and nerves of steel. You piloted a tiny ship in open space, dodging rocks and blasting anything that moved. A lot of us figured out you could survive longer by slowly spinning in place and firing non-stop. Not the most exciting tactic, but it worked. The game was such a hit that Atari started converting older cabinets just to meet demand. This is where it all started. The very first time we met Mario, though back then he was just Jumpman. Donkey Kong was tough, and those rolling barrels didn't cut anyone any slack. In every arcade, there always seemed to be a small crowd gathered around the machine, cheering or waiting their turn. We dropped quarter after quarter trying to rescue that pixelated girl at the top. Some of us spent whole afternoons and weeks of allowance chasing that high score. It wasn't just a game. It was a challenge, and we were hooked. Missile Command threw you right into chaos. Missiles raining down, cities exploding, and no time to think. The arcade version had that smooth trackball, letting you zip across the screen like a pro. But on the Atari at home, that joystick felt like moving through glue. Your bases would go up in smoke before you could even react. Still, there was something about it. The pressure, the sound, the flashing lights that kept us hitting start again and again. Galaga was one of those games that grabbed you from the first wave and didn't let go. The enemy patterns, the dive-bombing ships, the sound of that double blaster kicking in, it was arcade magic. And if your ship got captured, rescuing it to fight with two was the ultimate power move. We didn't just play Galaga, we waited in line at the arcade to get our turn. Fast, clean, addictive, and easily one of the greatest from that golden era. Pole position was the game that made us feel like we were really behind the wheel. A steering wheel, a gear shifter, and that one unforgettable line.
Prepare to qualify.
Even now, that distorted voice is burned into our brains. It wasn't just about speed. You had to actually learn the track, time your turns, and avoid crashing out. For a lot of us, this was the first racing game that felt fast, smooth, and way ahead of its time. Tempest looked like it came from the future. That spinning tunnel, those flashing vector lines, and the stars drifting behind it, it pulled us in the moment we saw it. We controlled a claw-shaped shooter, moving around the edge, blasting strange shapes that crawled toward us. The action was fast, the screen was always alive, and each level felt more intense than the last. For 1981, it was unlike anything else in the arcade, and most of us just couldn't walk past it. Q*bert was simple in theory, jump on cubes and change their color, but that diagonal joystick, it confused a lot of us as kids. We'd constantly send him flying off the edge by accident. Still, we loved it. The sound effects were unforgettable, the enemies were odd in the best way, and that little cartoon bubble full of random symbols when he got hit, that was the arcade version of swearing, and it cracked us up every single time. Tron was a big deal when it hit arcades. The cabinet glowed with bright neon, and the gameplay pulled us right into the world of the movie. You had light cycles, tanks, and grid battles, all packed into one machine. It looked great and felt different from the usual space shooters. And then came Discs of Tron, a sequel with more depth, but not as easy to find. If your arcade had both, chances are it had a crowd, too. Frogger made something as basic as crossing the street feel like life or death. You had traffic, logs, diving turtles, and just seconds to react. The gameplay was fast, But the rules were simple: move smart, time it right. And let's be honest, this game definitely reminded a lot of us to look both ways before crossing a road. For a game about a frog, it stuck with us longer than we expected. Defender was one of the toughest games in any arcade. Fast enemies, quick reflexes, and that scrolling screen that never gave you a break. There was no safe corner, no time to breathe, just pure chaos. But when we played it at home on the Atari, it felt just a bit easier, mostly thanks to the joystick. Still, no matter where we played it, staying alive more than a minute or two always felt like an achievement. Released in the late 70s, Space Invaders kicked off a new era of arcade games. Rows of aliens marching down, that steady pulse of sound speeding up as they got closer. It was pure tension. And here's a fun fact: the faster movement wasn't intentional. As you cleared more aliens, the game had less to process, so everything sped up. The developer noticed it, liked how it felt, and decided to keep it. Sometimes, the best features happen by accident. Contra was one of the best two-player games of its time. Playing side by side with a friend or your brother was half the fun. Unless you hit the waterfall level, then things got tense real fast. The non-stop action, the weapons, the explosions. It felt like Rambo in 8-bit form. A lot of us imagined we were action heroes, blasting through waves of enemies. And if you knew the famous code for 30 lives, you were a legend on the block. When Super Mario Bros. Hit the NES, it felt like a whole new world opened up. The scrolling levels, secret blocks, fire flowers, everything about it was bigger, brighter, and better than what we'd seen before. We ran, jumped, and slid down flagpoles like it was second nature. For many of us, this wasn't just a game, it was a reason to race home after school. It brought video games back into our living rooms and started a legacy that's still going strong. The Oregon Trail actually started way back in 1971 as a classroom project on a teletype machine, but most of us remember the 1985 version, the one with the blocky graphics, wagon wheels, and constant danger of dysentery. It showed up on Apple II computers in schools across America, and suddenly, learning about history wasn't so boring. We didn't always make it to Oregon, but we sure remember trying and losing half the party along the way. Centipede had a rhythm to it, fast movement, bright colors, and that satisfying snap of the trackball. You'd shoot your way through mushrooms, spiders, and of course, the centipede crawling down the screen. What a lot of people don't know is that this was one of the first arcade hits co-designed by a woman, programmer Donna Bailey, and it showed up in arcades everywhere. Simple, quick, addictive. The kind of game you'd play just one more time, about 10 times in a row. Pong first appeared in bars, bowling alleys, and early arcades, and people lined up to play. 2 paddles, 1 square ball, and that was all it took to grab our attention. It was simple, but back then, it felt completely new. And when Sears started selling the home version in the mid-70s, it brought that same experience into our living rooms. Pong didn't just start the arcade era, it kicked off everything that came after. This arcade game really made you feel like you were flying an X-Wing. The vector graphics were sharp, the action was fast, and the controller one of the best ever in an arcade. Some locations even had the sit-down version of the cabinet, which felt like a mini cockpit, if you were willing to pay a little more. Flying through the Death Star trench and hearing lines from the movie, it was pure excitement for Star Wars fans, and we couldn't get enough of it. Galaxian was the game that laid the groundwork for Galaga. It took the basic space shooter formula and added bright colors, smoother animation, and enemies that actually dove at you. You could hear it buzzing from the far end of the arcade. That sound always pulled us in. It was challenging, but fair, and it kept us reaching for one more quarter. For many of us, Galaxian was our first real taste of space combat. Rampage was pure mayhem, smashing buildings, eating civilians, and turning entire cities into rubble. You could play as a giant ape, a lizard, or a wolf, and if your friends joined in, the chaos only got better. It was one of the best multiplayer arcade games of its time. There wasn't really a goal, just survive and destroy, and somehow, that was all we needed. Few games let us cause this much trouble and still feel like we were winning. If this video brought back some good memories, there's plenty more on the channel about those times we all remember. And while you're here, share a memory about your favorite game in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching.